Johnny Talk Sports in with the Week 15 college football predictions, and we are almost at the finish line for the 2020 college football season. In a season where not many people thought that this season would get going, or a season that would finish. And we are almost there. We are in the final week of the regular season. Next week is Conference Championship Week, which is always a big week for college football. And then we will find out who will be the four teams competing in this season's college football playoff. Now, I'm going to be open and honest. I think we need an 8-team college football playoff for two reasons. One, it would give a group of 5 team an opportunity to prove themselves against one of the big dogs in college football. Like, you would give a Cincinnati or Coastal Carolina a chance to prove themselves against an Alabama, an Ohio State, a Clemson, whoever. You would also really give opportunities to conference champions. Even if it's a conference like the Pac-12, who is sitting at home for the college football playoff year in and year out. Especially for this season as an example. What if USC finishes their season unbeaten? Do they get an opportunity for a playoff berth? For a 14 playoff? Not really, considering that the Pac-12 looks like a weak conference. An 8-team playoff? Maybe if you're giving conference champions an automatic berth to the college football playoff. But what I've been wanting to see for a long time now is what if you have a 16-team playoff? You give every single conference champion an automatic spot in the college football playoff with a 16-team format. And then you give the rest at-large bids. I think that would be beneficial as well. So you would be giving a MAC team an opportunity to prove themselves against one of the big boys in college football. I mean, it doesn't have to be a 68-team tournament like it does for college basketball, but at least have the same kind of format for college football like you do for college basketball, giving every single conference champion an opportunity in your tournament or in your playoff, whatever you want to call it. So a 16-team playoff, I think would be good for college football. You would get every single conference champion in college football an opportunity, an automatic berth into that college football playoff, and then 6 at-large teams. So I think that's more beneficial. Now, of course, there are going to be those occasional Notre Dame that is usually independent, but they're in the ACC conference this year. And you have a BYU who was independent that could have gotten an at-large bid this year if they would have beaten Coastal Carolina under this potential format. But I just think that this year, I think it could be the year that we finally open up the debate and open up the discussion on whether or not to expand this college football playoff. Because honestly, I think that we are soon to have an expanded playoff, because I think there's so much controversy that comes in with just 4 teams. I mean, in half the seasons that we've been under this format, there has been some controversy on who was for and who shouldn't be for. So I think that's just something to look at. Now, tomorrow night, the committee will release their 3rd playoff ranking of the season, and I don't expect much for it to change at all. I expect Alabama to stay number 1. I expect Notre Dame to stay number 2. Clemson 3, Ohio State 4, A&M 5, Florida 6, Cincinnati 7. Well, the only thing that I could see changing, I could see Iowa State maybe moving up a spot. I could see Coastal Carolina maybe going into 11th or 12th. But that's about it. And for my college football playoff ranking, well, I have Alabama 1 still, Notre Dame 2 still. I'd say Clemson is probably my 3rd team, Ohio State 4, A&M 5, and Florida 6. Now, I know last week that I said that Florida, I think they deserved their spot in the top 4. But even though A&M, they struggled against Auburn, they dominated in the 4th quarter. And I think a performance like that is what the committee wants to see. They want to see these teams overcoming some adversity. And A&M, they may have been down 20-14 at the start of the 4th quarter, but they rallied and outscored Auburn 17-0 in the 4th quarter. So I think maybe performance like that could possibly boost up A&M's chances if we see Clemson beat Notre Dame in this ACC championship game. If we see that, especially what will be the margin of victory? Would Clemson win by 3 in double overtime, or would Clemson beat Notre Dame like 37-10? I think A&M's chances, I think it depends on what happens with Notre Dame and Clemson. Maybe the margin of victory, that could leave them out too, especially if Clemson beat Notre Dame by like 6 or by a field goal, and if Florida beats Alabama in the SEC championship game. But if Alabama and Notre Dame win, I feel like the committee, they have no choice than to put A&M at number 4. And their game this week against Ole Miss has been canceled. And since A&M plays Tennessee next week, and Tennessee plays Vanderbilt this week, and Vanderbilt, that game with Tennessee, is up in the air at this point. So many think that why not just have A&M and Tennessee play this week and then hold out for Ole Miss next week. I felt like that could be a logical choice, but unfortunately not many people, they like logic, and not many people enjoy the logistics or even care for logic or logistics. So I just can't see it happening. I'll be surprised if A&M, they still play this. I'll be surprised they can find an opponent, but we'll see. I think it's about a 99% chance that A&M will not be having this game made up against another opponent. But without further ado, let's get to the Week 15 college football predictions. Now, our first game of Week 15, we have the game between Michigan and Ohio State. One of the biggest rivalries, not only in college football, but probably in all of college sports. I'd say amongst all rivalries in college sports, I think this is probably the second biggest, only behind Duke and North Carolina for college basketball. And when you have a rivalry game, I know Michigan's struggling, and I know that many think that Jim Harbaugh could be on the hot seat at this point. When it's a rivalry matchup, you can throw out records, you can throw out stats, just throw out everything, and let it all settle out on the field. As much as I want to see this game be a hard-fought game, I just can't see it. I mean, just think about it. I mean, Ohio State, they're hungry. They know that they control their own destiny at this point. All Ohio State can do right now is take care of their business this week, and then a win, then go to the Big Ten Championship, take care of your business there, and just wait to see what the committee decides to do with Ohio State. And I think Ohio State wins this one big. Michigan has just struggled all season long. I mean, Michigan, they got blown out by a winless Penn State team. It took them triple overtime to get past Rutgers. Their only win of the season is against a really weak Minnesota team. So I'm going to pick Ohio State to win this game huge, and I think this isn't going to be close at all. I mean, I'll be surprised if Michigan is able to keep this game close. Now, I know Michigan's defense in the past, it's been pretty well during the season, but once they play Ohio State, their defense just isn't that good anymore, and it's really tough for them to defend. And I think this week is going to be no exception. I think the Buckeyes win this by a ridiculous score of probably 52-10. I'd say the Buckeyes, they win by at least probably 30-40. Next, we have an SEC showdown between Georgia and Missouri. And Missouri, they're on a 3-game winning streak. While Georgia, even though they're not going to the playoff, even though they're not going to the SEC championship game, still some aspirations for Georgia this season. They could potentially find themselves maybe in a New Year's Six game. And I think the Bulldogs are going to win this one. I know that Missouri's on a 3-game winning streak, and even if you're beating weaker opponents, a 3-game winning streak, those are confidence boosters. And especially when you're a young team and you have a head coach that's not as experienced as your opponent, that does boost some confidence. But I just think with Georgia, knowing that they could still get into the New Year's Six potentially, I just can't pick against the Bulldogs at this point. JT Daniels, he seemed to really improve he's really starting to improve Georgia's offense as it struggled for a couple of weeks with Stetson Bennett at quarterback, especially once they played those big teams like Alabama and Florida. JT Daniels, I think, is the quarterback for Georgia moving forward. I'm going to take the Bulldogs in a huge margin of victory. Next, we have a Pac-12 showdown between Washington and Oregon. Now, a couple of weeks ago, this matchup, it probably could have been one of the best games of the week. It probably could have really been a game where probably it could have boosted the winner's playoff resume, but ultimately it will not. Oregon is on a 2-game losing streak to Oregon State and to Cal, while Washington lost last week to Stanford. Now, what sticks out to me in this matchup, I think it's going to be the running games. The running game versus the run defense. That is going to be huge. And the reason why it's going to be huge is because Washington, they struggled in the run defense last week, giving up over 100 yards of offense. In fact, they gave up a total of 138 rushing yards to Austin Jones last week and 2 touchdowns, and then an additional 44 yards and a touchdown to Nathaniel Pete. Well, for Oregon, I still think that this is just a young team, and it's kind of difficult to adjust to a new quarterback, especially in a season like this, where your season started really late, and you are trying to replace Justin Herbert, who went on to the NFL to be a first-round draft pick. While Oregon's running game, I still think it looks pretty good with Travis Dye and C.J. Verdell. So I think that Oregon's run game is going to be better than Washington's run game. And I just think Washington is going to continue to struggle at stopping the run. So I'm going to go with Oregon to bounce back in this game. I know their quarterback play needs to improve a little bit, but I think it's going to get better the further along that the season goes for Oregon, even though their season is coming to a close soon. I think maybe next season we'll see Oregon potentially be a Pac-12 contender again next season. So I'm going to go with the Ducks. We have another Pac-12 match between undefeated USC and UCLA. Now for this one, this is a rivalry game as well. So throw out the record books, throw out the stats, and let it settle out on the field. And I think that's what's going to happen in this game. We've got a good quarterback matchup between Keenan Slovis for USC and Dorian Robinson for UCLA. Dorian Thompson Robinson. And I think this is going to be an offensive battle. I mean, I think it's going to come down to which team has the ball last in this game. And I think it's probably going to be USC in this one. I think UCLA keeps this game close, and they say that Chip Kelly's in the hot seat. They said that Clay Kelton would be on the hot seat if this was a regular season, but it's a shortened season. And I think that with every win that USC has, I think it's saving Clay Helton's job at this point. And UCLA, a win here, it would save Chip Kelly's job. So this is a battle between two head coaches that were potentially on the hot seat and probably would be on the hot seat if we had a regular and normal season, but we do not. But I'm going to pick USC in this one. I just think it's going to be down to the better quarterback play here, and I got to give that edge to Slovis, especially with this air raid offense with USC. I'm just going to pick the Trojans in this one. I think this game goes in either direction, but I would favor it in the Trojans' favor. Next, we have a Big Ten matchup between Wisconsin and Iowa. And Iowa's defense has improved, along with Iowa's offense. The Iowa team as a whole, ever since their second game of the season against Northwestern, they have improved. While Wisconsin, they have just looked lost in their last couple of games. They have had inferior performances against Northwestern and Indiana. Two of the surprises in the Big Ten, in fact, probably the two surprises in the Big Ten Conference. While Iowa, they're looking a lot better. Iowa looks like a Big Ten championship contender. Unfortunately, they lost their opening 2 games of the season, but they were very close. So it's not like they were blown out. And imagine if Iowa, if only they could have finished those 2 games, if only they could have pulled those 2 games out, we'd be looking at an undefeated Iowa team right now. While Wisconsin, they have been struggling offensively in these last 2 weeks. Their defense is still looking pretty strong as well. So to me, I think this game, it could easily be a defensive battle. But I'm going to favor Iowa here because even though the defenses are going to be the huge storyline in this game, the offense has to put up the points to win. And if it's coming down to offense, of an offense having to score points, I would pick Iowa in this situation just because Iowa's offense has done a lot better in these last few weeks than Wisconsin has. Wisconsin's offense has struggled. They've looked lost. So I'm going to pick the Hawkeyes in this one. Next, we have Cincinnati and Tulsa. A win here for Cincinnati would boost up their playoff resume, as Tulsa is right now in the top 25. While this game, it was supposed to be played at some point in this season, but it got postponed. But it will be played this week. For Tulsa, their quarterback, Zach Smith, his senior season. I mean, what better way to go out than to pull off an upset against a top 10 team in Cincinnati? But Tulsa's offense, their offense looked pretty well. I mean, they've held their own against Oklahoma State earlier in the season. But Cincinnati, they have shut down high-powered offenses that they have faced this season. They've shut down SMU. They've shut down Memphis. They gave up a little bit against UCF, but they held their own and they pulled it out. And I think that this is going to be no different. I think Desmond Ridder is going to have a huge game this week. I think Desmond Ridder will be a huge difference on the ground this week. And I think Cincinnati will win this week, and they will keep their playoff hopes alive. And it's going to boost up the resume, since Tulsa is, I believe right now, 24th or 23rd. But either way, a top 25 victory, that's going to be huge for them. And finally, what I think is going to be the game of the week this week, North Carolina and Miami, an ACC showdown. Now, North Carolina, I feel like they held their own against Notre Dame. In fact, they probably should have made that game a lot closer. In fact, they were hanging in there just fine until that fourth down penalty. And I'm surprised they jumped off sides in that situation, because I wouldn't have imagined that Notre Dame was going to go for it on 4th and 1 from their own 24-yard line in a tie game. While Miami, their only loss of the year is to Clemson, the number 3 team in the country right now. So this is going to be a huge showdown. In fact, I think that this is a game where a New Year's 6 bid is on the line. I think the winner of this game is going to go to the New Year's 6. And we've got a great quarterback battle between De'Aaron King from Miami and Sam Howell from North Carolina. And I'm going to go with Miami in this one. I just think that Miami, they just need a season to really get their program back on track. And to finish their season with their only loss being to Clemson, I think that'd be a huge accomplishment. I think a game like this and a season like this is going to help out with recruiting in the future to get Miami back to where I feel like they belong, as to one of the blue bloods in college football. I think this is going to be a game where Miami is going to be able to bring their program back. It's going to impact recruiting in the future. While North Carolina, they still struggle in the fourth quarter. They've had a couple of games this year where they just couldn't finish the deal against Florida State and against Notre Dame. They played tough in those games, but they just couldn't pull it out. So I'm going to pick Miami in this one. So those are my Week 15 college football predictions. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time.